All right, folks, we're going to get started. I think everybody's here as far as my Tori. I'm sorry I didn't say hello to you. No worries. Everybody's here as far as the Planning Commission. So we'll start off this evening's meeting with a call to order and then roll call. And I'm calling it to order right now.
Do that.
Dallas Planning Commission is now called to order on Tuesday, December the 12th, 2023, our last meeting of 2023. It's a little after 7 p.m. and I call the meeting to order. We will call the roll call and then I have an announcement to make.
Commissioner Newell,
Here.
Commissioner Kowash,
Here.
Commissioner Banford,
Here.
Commissioner Schulte,
Here.
There you go. That's right.
Commissioner Spofford,
Here.
and Commissioner Swanson.
Here. Okay, we have a quorum present. Before we get to the approval of minutes, I want to announce for anyone, if you'll take a look at the screens that are on the side here, our third public hearing scheduled for this evening was a modification for the third phase of the Creekside subdivision by David Radke. The final notices announcing the rescheduled date will be mailed shortly. That has been postponed until the January meeting. I apologize to anyone that has come out to hear testimony or hear presentations or to testify on that issue. There was a noticing error made by the city of Dallas for folks that might want to call in electronically to testify. I think it was an incorrect phone number was put out to people. So that precludes folks from participating that are in the public notice area. And again, it's one of those administrative mistakes that can occur. And I apologize for anybody that wasted their time coming down here, but we will not be hearing the Creekside 3 subdivision modification this evening. And we will take it up on January the 9th, our first meeting of the new year. So apologies and thank you very much. So we'll move on to agenda item number 3, approval of the minutes of the regular meeting from last month, November 2023. Has the planning commissioners had a chance to review those minutes? And are there any modifications, questions? If not, I will entertain a motion to approve.
I'll motion to approve.
Thank you.
Minutes.
Second. Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor of approving the minutes of last month's meeting, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed the same? Minutes are approved. Agenda item number 4 this evening, public comment. This is an opportunity for citizens to speak on items not on the agenda. So if there's anyone present or that is joining us electronically or online, which I guess that's probably not happening if they got the wrong phone number.
Depends on which notice they got.
Okay, so at any rate, if there's anyone present that would like to make comment on any issue or subject that is not on our agenda this evening, this is your chance to do so. Is there anyone here that would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, we'll move on. Agenda item number 5 are our public hearings for this evening. Our first public hearing is a conditional use permit number 23-11. It's at 636 Main Street, the Dallas Community School, and it's a conditional use permit for a high school in a former bank building in the downtown area. The public hearing is regarding the property at 635 Main Street. This is an official public hearing before the Dallas Planning Commission, and I now declare the public hearing open at 7:05 p.m.
36.
As the application is subject to land use proceedings recognized by state law, I'm required to read the following statement. The failure to raise an issue with sufficient detail to afford the Planning Commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based upon that issue. Please direct all testimony to the record and the applicable criteria listed in the staff report or to criteria in the Dallas Development Code you believe applies to the decision. Applicable approval criteria can be found in code section. Chase, please help me out.
4.4040.
Okay. At this time, I will ask any members of the planning commission if they have a conflict of interest, a site visit or ex parte contact to declare on this conditional use permit at 635 Main Street. Seeing none, we'll move on.
Yeah, I think your script said 635 Main Street.
636.
Okay, 636 is correct. That had we have 363 up there. The notice was correct going out though for the address of the property.
Okay.
636.
All
All right.
Okay. Well, you know what? We got a new year starting next year. So
Aye.
bring it up a notch. So thank you for that. Explain. I got it wrong. The slide got it wrong. Great. Okay. This hearing will be conducted in the following manner, if all goes according to plan. We will begin with a staff report followed by questions of staff. Thereafter, we'll hear from the applicant, including members of the applicant team, for a total of 15 minutes. And this may be followed by questions from the planning commission to the applicant. Thereafter, we'll hear from all others interested in presenting testimony on this item before the commission. Each person presenting testimony will be provided 5 minutes to testify. We will then provide the applicant with 5 minutes to rebut anything that's brought up in testimony. After we've heard all testimony, I will close the hearing and ask the planning commission to deliberate and then ask if there is a motion in response to this proposal. In this case, the planning commission's decision is final unless the decision is appealed. At this time, we'll start with the staff report. May we have the staff report, please?
Yes, so as mentioned, this is a conditional use application. Conditional use permits, they have 3 approval criteria. The site has to be adequate for the need. Negative impacts on adjacent properties can be mitigated, and public facilities have to have adequate capacity to support the development of the site. They also have to satisfy the approval criteria for site design review. There's 5 approval criteria for that. Application is complete. Underlying land use district standards are met. Any non-conforming development on the site has to be upgraded. The design standards of Article 3 have to be met, and the pre-existing conditions of approval, if any, are met. Staff report goes into greater detail as to how the application kind of satisfies those criteria, and the applicant themselves provided quite a comprehensive application narrative. So credit to them on that. Was much higher quality than many of the ones that we received. So well done to them. For discussion of the site, it is 636 Main Street. The slideshow is incorrect. I apologize for that. But that's on Main Street in the downtown in the Central Business District. We can see here the vicinity photo. The site is there on Main Street at the site of the former Wells Fargo building. From the applicants, and we can see the existing abandoned or vacant, I should say, bank building there. So that's what it looks like currently as you drive down Main Street. Fun fact, we now have new Google Street View imagery for 2023 here in Dallas. So as city planner, I'm really excited about that. But so from the applicant's slideshow, we have the site plan here. And so this is a look at the block and the various access points that are along that block, especially access into the site for the school. Zooming in, we can see that there's a set of parking stalls for student parking on the north side, and there's some additional parking for staff and visitors. And you can see the circulation patterns through the site there. Inside the building, we have a floor plan. They're going to reconfigure the interior of the building pretty significantly to accommodate classrooms, offices, those sorts of spaces. And so, the application appears to meet all of the relevant approval criteria. And so staff are recommending approval with the condition that they obtain all required building permits and inspections from the Dallas Building Department prior to occupancy by students, since there is quite a bit of remodeling to take place inside to make it suitable for their use. That's that's the presentation that I've got for you. If there's further questions from Planning Commission, certainly happy to answer them.
Commissioners, any questions for staff? No other conditions recommended for this conditional use then?
Not at this time, no.
Is there enough parking there to accommodate the use?
So that's certainly an interesting question. The staff report does touch on that a bit. The central business district does not actually require any off-street parking. Although the conditional use permit requires that there be adequate parking to support the need. So how those two code sections intersect is certainly an interesting topic of debate. What is adequate if the requirement is 0? So perhaps the applicant can speak a little more to their parking demand analysis as to, how many spaces they would need for employees versus students and what have you. But the code requirement for a school in the downtown is 0. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
So if there's no other questions, then we will move on. We'll now hear from the applicant. So please step up, have a seat at the microphone, state your name and your address for the record, and we will hear from the applicant. You have 15 minutes, but we can certainly accommodate an extra minute or 2 if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marlene Gillis. I'm president of Soderstrom Architects. My address 3708 Northeast 136th Place, Portland 97230. So we have been working with the Dallas Community School in the planning process, started with a feasibility study for this building to determine if we could accommodate their program and their school in the space. Turned out that it worked quite well for their needs. And then we went through and did the conditional use application to confirm that. As well, we have a sister school across the street, right, which has been established, and there's definitely going to be a connection between those with the high school students being over here and the K-8 students in the original building that they currently are. They're out of room, right? So it's a very successful program. They just need more space. So that's the goal for this building, is to continue to expand their campus and their offerings for their high school students. So we're really excited at the opportunity to do this. Relative to the parking question that was brought up, I think that's a really good one. They have, as part of the property purchase, they've also purchased an adjacent lot. I hope my coordinates are right, southeast of the building, which should accommodate adequate staff and student parking based on the students that they anticipate having. They're limited by their charter, how many students they can have. So that should help with that too. So I really appreciate the description in the staff report. I think that covered all of the major issues. It's been great to work with the city of Dallas. You guys are awesome to get this through. And so I'm here to answer any questions. Don't really have a lot.
Thank you. Do planning commissioners, do we have any questions of the applicant on this application? So this is county owned property, correct? So the school will be leasing it from the county.
I believe the school is purchasing the property from the
School is
county.
purchasing the property. Okay, well, I just saw that the property owner in the application was the county.
Yep.
So this is not a joint county school project. This is a school project.
That's correct.
Are there any, I guess I had the only one. I don't have any more questions. So we'll now hear from those, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And stand by, because if there's anybody else that has any questions, we'll call on you again. We'll now hear from those in attendance tonight who would like to address the commission on this item. Please raise your hand if you'd like to testify. Thank you, sir. Please step right up and state your name and your address for the record, and then go ahead. You have 5 minutes, but again, we're flexible and want to work with anybody that
Sure.
has an issue here.
Yeah, my name's Sam Orr. It's OWRE 392 Southeast Ironwood, Dallas. I am the property owner directly to the south of the previous Wells Fargo building. So we share, that's actually a private alleyway there, but we share that with the proposed property here. I just wanted to commend the school that operates across the street from us for doing an excellent job over the last 2 or 3 years, how long they've been there, of traffic control, parking control, and just overall being a good neighbor. My wife, Sarah, and I, who own the building together, are fully in support of this project. I'm not sure there are any other local property owners that will be closer to us than that school. We could probably reach out and touch it from our property. And we wanted to make sure that the school knew that they had the support of at least one neighbor there, because they've been excellent neighbors across the street. A question, I have a clarification question, would be the parking, extended parking to the southeast, if I'm picturing it correctly, includes a private but publicly used driveway where you can turn off of Jefferson, that it kind of bisects our two lots. I think Taters probably uses that parking lot. Well, I know they do now. I'm curious if that's the plan, and if that private but publicly used intersection driveway will still be accessible to through traffic. Are they going to do improvements on the blacktop and things like that? I'm just curious about property development and the flow of traffic that'll be coming through there.
Thank you. Chase, if we can go back to their submitted, I believe they showed that as an access point off of Jefferson right there.
Yes.
See the orange arrows there that are on Jefferson Street. I think that's what you're talking about.
Exactly. So they had mentioned a extended parking area to the south and east. And I'm curious where that area is.
Well, we'll let the applicant address that. Thank you for the question. And just for your purposes after tonight, I follow up with Chase at the staff as to how that is. But my understanding is because no parking is technically required at all in the downtown district, which is, a double-edged sword in a situation like this. I'm just ask you to continue to be a good neighbor and work with them as they develop their plans. But their more specific plans, maybe we can leave that slide up and we can ask the applicant to perhaps address that. Thank you.
That they're gonna
Not yet. Well, after.
Okay.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add?
No, thanks.
Okay, well, thank you. Is there anyone else present that would like to testify on this issue that's present this evening? And is there anyone available online?
No one in the queue.
No one in the queue. Okay, so now this is the time where we'll ask the applicant to come on back up and address the question presented in testimony.
So thank you for that. And I may have not used my words very carefully when I said expanded parking. We're not modifying the parking that's there currently. We're just expanding what was shown on the plan as far as directly adjacent to us to having some additional parking because it's part of the purchase. So can I get up and point to it?
Oh,
Is that okay?
please, yes, thank you.
So this is the additional lot that's included in the purchase, which I think is the one you're talking about. So it will be used for school parking, but they're not planning.
Thank you.
They're not planning to modify it as far as ingress or egress at all. And certainly with the difference in hours of use, potentially, if it's currently used for some businesses, evening hours when the school wouldn't be there, I'm sure there would be a way to do some sort of cooperative agreement or even an informal agreement to share parking, I would assume.
So if there's any kind of a conflict down the road, I'm sure that our applicant is amenable to come to an understanding with the neighboring property owners. Thank you.
Yeah, I think they're very interested in being good neighbors. And if they're not using it, I don't think they would have any issue with allowing other uses too.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
And I appreciate the testimony. Testimony of support from a neighbor carries a lot of water. I appreciate that. So are there any final comments from staff or the city attorney on this issue?
Not me.
Anyone?
I think I heard from the commenter that they were wondering about who would be responsible for taking care of that lot, the ingress egress.
Maybe the owner of the property.
And I wasn't clear if they owned the egress or not. So, I'm just wondering about that.
I believe I heard that it was shared by the adjacent property owners. Chase, can you address that?
So I'm not a surveyor, so I can't say how accurate this is, but I have seen on the county tax assessor's maps that there is a strip of, it appears to be a right of way that extends partway through that block. It's the skinny strip that you see there,
Mhm.
coming in from Jefferson. On the county tax maps, it appears to be a right of way that just kind of dead ends. How accurate that record is, again, I'm not a surveyor, I've not done a title search. But
If
just
there
from
were
the-
concerns on the condition of that, I can make an assumption that the folks that use it would come to an agreement to fix it up because it's not public right away. Is that?
That's a good question. It may be public right of way. It's not, I don't know, Mr. Gilson, if you have that knowledge firsthand.
Is that a public right of way?
It certainly looks that way on the tax assessor's map, but that's not always a
The
definitive.
reason I asked the question is there's some places in town where it seems like nobody knows who's in charge to take care of blacktop that's in the middle,
Right.
per se, like, Rite Aid and different places.
Well,
So
that's
I
very, that's very
wonder-
clear who's responsible for that.
Okay, all right. That's kind of what I was trying to get at.
It's just not done.
Yes,
Right.
sir. My point.
Yeah.
That's why we have a code enforcement department,
Right.
yes.
Waiting for Mr. Gilson to give us the answer.
Yes.
Real time.
That's totally fine.
Going to the map, it does look like it's right of way. I'm trying to look back at historic surveys to see if I can find one that.
It'd be like an old alley.
It looks like an alley, but it doesn't extend all the way.
Right.
the block.
Right,
It's
right.
like 3/4 of the way.
Yeah,
Okay,
I'm familiar with that.
so maybe there is a little glitchy thing there.
Whoever doesn't want their,
And that building that's adjacent there to the right of was a gym for the old school, which is no
Yes,
longer, I mean,
yes.
this is downtown.
I
very, very
understand that.
old and funky.
I understand that, but that's kind of where it seems to occur, where there's more than one. Property.
Well, as long as that is being used, I think that we're in a position to make an assumption that the folks that are using it to their benefit will be responsible to maintain it.
So the original plat of that area, going back to whenever, like early 1900s, shows a full width alleyway. That portion on the west was vacated in September of 1979. So probably when the bank was built.
Probably about the time the bank was built, right?
So the bank has the vacated part,
Right.
so the bank has the vacated part and the rest is alleyway. Okay,
something the city might want to consider be vacating that right of way.
maybe.
But I don't think that's relevant.
Not for- no.
That's not
No.
relevant to what we're discussing here this evening.
Throwing-
Thank you.
It's in the universe.
Thank you, Carol. Mr. Schulte, do you have a question or a comment?
I have a question,
Go ahead.
and correct me if I'm wrong. I seem to recall your predecessor giving an impassioned speech to us about using downtown retail space for anything other than retail.
Mhm.
A really impassioned speech, like, don't do that anymore.
Right.
I don't see that in criteria.
It's not.
It makes an awful lot of common sense that we would want to use our retail space for retail. Is that subject relevant here, or is the fact that it's not in criteria just not relevant?
Yeah, this application has to be decided based on the criteria in the code that is in force. And we don't have any limitations like that in the code. So we can't impose them through a quasi judicial hearing.
But is that something as a separate matter in
Yes.
the future that should be followed up? Because
Yeah, and it is, and you're exactly right, John, and I do agree with you in theory that, our downtown retail core is doesn't have as much downtown retail business commercial use as it might in a more healthy downtown. Fact is, we're a county seat. There's lots of administrative buildings and government buildings downtown. And the property is being proposed. A conditional use is a permitted use with the opportunity for us and the staff to apply conditions to it. So while we do all agree that commercial space being diverted to a use for other than retail or commercial use is an issue. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're looking at that node on the north side of town there for adding commercial space to town. But we're precluded from really having the ability to restrict the use as applied for in this case and to set it aside. I mean, the bank decided to not do business in Dallas anymore. The county bought the building for use that they were proposing and then decided not to go through with it. And now it sounds like they're in the process of selling it for the use as a school. So I can also say that historically, there was a school on that block. The original Dallas High School was right around the corner there on Academy Street. In fact, that building that's adjacent to the alley was the gymnasium building. If you go in there, you can still see the basketball sidelines and foul line on the floor in there. So it's, downtown's evolved, and my personal opinion is to see a use in a vacant building is a higher and better use, even if it's not a commercial retail use. But thank you for the.
May I ask one more question?
Yes, please.
I remember this from the school across the street, and it was never clear on the answer. Having two schools on the main artery like that, does that impose anything traffic plan wise on that artery?
Well, I don't believe so, in that the only thing that could be added would be 20 mile per hour speed limit limitation, but the speed limit is already 20 miles per hour on Main Street there in front of that school.
Crossings or?
Crossings at the corner as.
Okay.
Didn't they address the traffic too, because it used to have a bank drive-through and it actually decreased the traffic? I think according to the report, right?
Their
So
narrative.
decreased it slightly over the old use.
So it's an adaptive reuse of an existing building in our downtown, and that's what we're considering. So good comments though, and I appreciate that. Are there any other comments or questions from staff or from Planning Commission? Hearing none, I'll declare this hearing closed at 7:29 p.m. Now we'll have deliberation on the topic by the Planning Commission. Anyone have anything to say about this conditional use application to put a high school into the former Wells Fargo Bank building there on Main Street?
I just want to echo the same sentiment. I love what's being done as far as getting the uses in the downtown building. I agree that it's prime for redevelopment. It goes back to some of the other discussions we've had tied to downtown. So I have mixed feelings about it, but mostly positive that there'll be staff, younger people downtown, people using the space outweighing, hopefully in the future we'll see redevelopment of the site, but it's not at this point.
Thank you.
Well, and perhaps there'll be some sort of commercial type business that goes in that can assist the students at lunchtime.
More bodies downtown is good for the businesses that do exist downtown, correct? Any other comments, deliberations, questions from planning commissioners? The public hearing is closed. So is there a motion by a member of the planning commission on this conditional use permit?
I'll move to approve the conditional use permit with the conditions stated in the staff report.
Thank you.
Second.
Okay, the motion's been made and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, we'll now vote on the motion. The motion is to approve the conditional use permit for a high school to be installed at 636 Main Street And not seeing any controversy or differences of opinion, we'll just do a voice vote. Voting on the motion, those in approval, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same. Hearing none. The motion passes unanimously. An order reflecting this commission's decision tonight will be mailed to the applicant and all participants of the record within 10 business days. Thank you very much. And we will now move on to our next public hearing. The next public hearing is a little bit different. This is a legislative type 4 public hearing, and it is for a comp plan amendment and zone change from industrial to residential medium density located on Cloud Corner Road. No street address is provided, owned by Ken Perkins. And that is CPA 2301. This is an official public hearing before the Dallas Planning Commission, and I now declare the public hearing open at 7:32 p.m.
John,
Yes.
just a correction maybe on the script. This is an application, this is an applicant initiated zone change. That makes it a type 3, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is not coming from, it's not initiated by the city.
I see. So then that makes our decision this evening final, and it's not referred to.
No, it does have to go to council because the adopting enactment will be an ordinance.
So it's a type 4.
No. Type 4 can be initiated by the city, or it can also, no, type 4 is initiated by the city. If it's initiated by an application, then it proceeds as a quasi judicial in terms of how it's heard.
But if it's type 3, then the planning commission makes the final decision.
Not in the case of a zone change. Trust me on this.
I'm not disputing this. I'm
Trust
wondering
me
if
on this.
maybe there's some updates to our development
Okay.
code to reflect this that are in order. Okay.
At any rate, I believe we can move on.
Yes, this
We can
will
move-
go to council because the zone change has to be adopted, and comprehensive plan amendment have to be adopted by
Right.
an ordinance, but the application it's initiated by an applicant, which makes it a type 3 in terms of how it's handled at the hearing.
Okay. Thank you, Lane.
Mhm.
That's why he's here. Appreciate it. We've got excellent legal counsel, and we do appreciate that. I was when I said it was different than the previous one, it's because to finally adopt the comp plan amendment and the zone change, it is referred to the city
Yeah.
council, who will make a final decision at one of their meetings in the future.
Yeah, I'm sorry, if you look on page 2 at the top, it does refer to the criteria for quasi judicial amendments, which is correct. Quasi judicial is the type 3 proceeding.
Okay.
Type 4 would be a legislative amendment, not a
Excellent.
quasi judicial.
Okay. So the public hearing is open, and I will read the following statement. Failure to raise an issue with sufficient detail to afford the planning commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue precludes appeal to the State Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Please direct all testimony to the record and the applicable criteria listed in the staff report or to criteria in the Dallas Development Code you believe applies to the decision. The applicable approval criteria are found in what code chapters, Chase? I do not have that in front of me. I apologize.
So that's 4.7030B.
Thank you. At this time, I will ask any members of the planning commission if they have a conflict of interest, if you've done a site visit or an ex parte contact to declare on this application. Seeing none, this hearing will be conducted in the following way. We'll begin with the staff report, followed by questions of staff. Thereafter, we'll hear from the applicant, including any members of the applicant's team, for a total of 15 minutes. And this may be followed by questions from the planning commission of the applicant. Thereafter, we'll hear from all others interested in presenting testimony on this item before the commission, and each person will be provided 5 minutes to testify. Then we will provide the applicant with 5 minutes to rebut any testimony that was presented after their presentation. After we've heard all testimony, I will close the hearing and ask the commission to deliberate, and then ask if there is a motion in response to this proposal. In this case, the commission's decision will be referred to the city council for final adoption at a city council date to be determined in the future, which will be notified appropriately. At this time, we'll start with the staff report. May we have the staff report, please?
Yes, so as mentioned, the approval criteria for comprehensive plan amendments and zone changes that are quasi judicial, not legislative, are contained in section 4.7030B. The first is that the request is consistent with the statewide planning goals, also has to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. To the extent that there are locational policies and those sorts of things in the comprehensive plan that guide those kind of changes. Public facilities have to have adequate capacity to support development of the site at the proposed zoning. The change is in the public interest and the request conforms to the transportation planning rule under state law. So as mentioned, this location is on Clow Corner Road. They're in the southeast part of town. Here's a closer in vicinity photo of that. The noticing on this was a little bit challenging. The property was somewhat recently partitioned, and there is currently not a tax lot number assigned to that partitioning. We've been told that those won't be available until after the new year, because the county is currently still doing tax rules based on the old tax maps. So it's parcel number 3 of the partitioning, but it does not yet have a separate tax lot number. So but you can see there on the air photo kind of circled where that proposed comp plan amendment and zone change is located. The current zoning shown on the map here shows that that site is zoned as industrial. You may recall that last year there was an annexation proceeding that took place, annexing this particular property into the city. The applicant at that time was requesting a zone change and comprehensive plan amendment. City Council ended up approving industrial zoning. And so that's the zoning that we see currently on the zoning map. As part of this application, they're proposing to rezone that back portion to be medium density residential, but still keeping the industrial zoning on the front portion. I'm realizing now that my presentation did not include a comprehensive plan map, which would have been useful, so my apologies on that. But the property immediately to the east, currently shown inside the dotted red line, which is the urban growth boundary, that's also comp plan industrial. So there would be industrial property kind of on 3 sides of that site. But given that it's accessed from the dead end residential street, that's certainly a constraint to any potential redevelopment of that back parcel is discussed in the application. The staff report goes into some greater detail as to how the application meets the relevant approval criteria. But staff believe that those approval criteria can be found to be met, and are recommending that the Planning Commission forward this application to the City Council with a recommendation for approval. Certainly happy to answer questions that the Planning Commission may have to help in your deliberations, but otherwise that's what I've got for my presentation. So
Thank you. Planning Commissioners, do we have any questions of staff on this application and the staff report?
So would Anna Avenue just run into the residential? Is that the plan?
right, so we don't currently have a development proposal, so there isn't a subdivision plan or what have you that has been presented to us as an application. State law, the goalpost rule, the zone change is a change in a development regulation, and we can't change the rules of development after a limited land use application like a subdivision is received. So zoning has to take place first, then we can proceed with development of the site. But yes, just from looking at it, it would appear that primary site access for the residential portion would be from Anna Avenue. We do have street connectivity standards and those sorts of things in terms of the design of street connectivity and what have you. But in the absence of an actual development application, it's difficult to speculate. Subdivisions, of course, would come back to the planning commission for further review at that time. So,
And I'll just add that that street is stubbed out for a purpose so that it can be continued to the east, and it's not, wasn't designed into a cul-de-sac. So
Mhm.
I think it's a safe assumption that future development planning would include the extension of Anna Avenue to accommodate it. Are there any other planning commissioner questions for staff on the staff report on this comp plan amendment and zone change? Tori?
Does medium density residential help address our housing needs analysis, shortage of a residential? housing?
yes, our housing needs analysis showed that we had a shortage of 22 acres of the medium density. We have done some rezoning since that was adopted, but we still are short. We still have a deficit of that kind of zoning. So this would contribute towards rectifying that deficit. And we certainly have a substantial surplus of the industrial land. So it wouldn't necessarily impact the 20-year supply of industrial land under current projections. So.
Thank you. Any other questions, commissioners? Okay, now we'll hear from the applicant. So please step forward. As a reminder, you have 15 minutes to present, and please state your name and your address for the record. Mr.
there.
Applicant, hi.
My name's Fred Evander. I live at 746 Southeast Shelton here in Dallas. I'm here speaking on behalf of Ken Perkins. I won't talk very long. I think everything that Mr. Perkins wanted to say is included in his submittal for the application. It absolutely meets the 5 criteria that you folks are required to consider. Our basic argument is this is absolutely in the public interest. The applicant has every intention of extending Southeast Anna into the site. And looking at the site and the surrounding neighborhood, it makes a whole lot more sense to have a residential neighborhood go into a residential neighborhood than to have an industrial neighborhood go through a residential neighborhood. Looking at that, I would argue that, and one of the criteria requires you folks to consider whether it's in the public interest. I would say yes. Based on that, it's in the public interest. And given the fact that your industrial land has a 168 acre surplus and you need medium density residential housing in the city, I would argue, yes, it's absolutely in the public interest. Everything else that the applicant wanted to argue is included in our submittal. I'd be happy to answer any questions, though, that you have of us.
Thank you. Planning commissioners, do we have any questions of the applicant? Seeing none?
I will also say that Mr. Perkins is in the audience tonight, and he has talked to folks in the Southeast Anna neighborhood just about this submittal, and generally they have been in favor of changing this back portion of the site to residential.
Thank you. We'll now hear from those in attendance tonight that would like to address the planning commission on this item. If there's anybody here that would like to testify on this comp plan amendment and zone change, please raise your hand. Thank you very much. Please step forward, your name and address, and go ahead. You've got about 5 minutes.
My name is Nancy Tidwell. I live at 1570 Southwest or Southeast Anna Avenue. If you look up here where it says RM, the very first yellow block next to the gray at the top, that is my home. Under no circumstances do I want industrial properties all the way around my home. That is his land is adjacent to my backyard where my grandchildren play. I do not want industrial property around my home where my grandchildren and my children come to visit. The neighbors in my neighborhood, we are all in full support of Kim, of doing this. Right now, my house is at the end of that road. It doesn't go any further. I'm the last one. Right now, I look out into a field. And I would rather see a park, which he has proposed, and homes for folks that need homes than to have more industrial property, which we do not need. So yes, we're in full support of Ken and what he is doing. So,
Hey,
thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming in and participating. Is there anybody else here that would like to address the commission on this item? Please raise your hand. Seeing none? We'll now allow the applicant 5 minutes to rebut the testimony. I don't see, you don't necessarily have to. There's nothing to rebut. The testimony is in support of the project. So are there any final comments or questions from the staff or the city attorney on this application? Any commissioners have any additional questions of the applicant team? Seeing none, I will now declare this public hearing closed at 7:46 p.m. And we will ask for deliberations on this topic by the planning commission. Do we have any questions on this? I think that any of the concerns that we might have come up with were addressed by the applicants and the team. And we talked about the need for residential and the surplus of industrial land, and also the compatibility with this proposal with the adjacent residential neighborhood. Is there any other discussion or deliberation that we'd like to have on this before we move forward with a motion?
I think my concerns would be addressed when they actually come back and show a site plan, because then we could look and see how the traffic is gonna flow and where it would come out onto the main arteries. So I would table until then.
Okay, thank you.
I do have concerns with the loss of industrial land. I know that we have surplus, we need additional housing, but my fear is what it creates. The more housing you put there, it renders the industrial, even though will be retained now as comp plan zone as industrial, it will force basically that to convert to residential. So I have concerns about loss of industrial zone property on arterials. That's all.
Okay, your concern is noted. Thank you. Anything else we want to deliberate on before we entertain a motion? If not, I will ask for a motion by a member of the planning commission. And remember, what we are doing is we are recommending this proposal, the comp plan amendment and the zone change, to the city council to make a final decision and adoption at a later date, which will all be notified again, and another public hearing will occur at the city council. So does anyone like to make that motion?
I make a motion to do what you just said.
Okay, to approve make the motion, a motion has been made to approve the project as submitted with staff recommendations. We have second by Mary. Thank you very much. We'll now vote on the motion. The motion is to approve and recommend this comp plan amendment and zone change to the city council. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, the same?
No.
Okay, do we want to? I don't think we need to do a roll call.
You've got the vote, right?
You've got the vote.
The minutes
Okay.
should reflect who voted how.
Thank you very much. So the motion passes, and it will be referred to city council at a future date. An order reflecting the commission's decision tonight will be mailed to the applicant and all participants of record within 10 business days. So that concludes that public hearing for tonight's meeting, and it's our final public hearing this evening. I want to thank you for coming in and testifying, for the applicant team for coming in, and for staff and commission members as we went through this evening. Our next public hearing would have been the one that's been deferred until January, and I think that we'll tackle that when it comes to us in the new year, rescheduled for January 9th, which will be our next meeting. So now we will move on to I've got two different agendas here in front of me. Agenda item number 6 is the rent burden community discussion. Is that correct, or has that been?
That is correct.
Okay. So thanks, folks. we'll now move on to agenda item number 6, the rent burden community discussion.
So to preface this, there is a state law that kind of identifies a definition for rent burdened communities. And so the state identifies at the beginning of each year which communities meet that definition for the preceding year. Communities that are so identified, the state law requires for us to have a public meeting, either with the elected body or with some designee of the elected body, such as the Planning Commission. And at that meeting, we are to discuss the causes of rent burdens, the impacts of the rent burdens, barriers to removing rent burdens, and those sorts of things. There's no particular outcome that's mandated by state law, so we don't have to necessarily make a code change or policy proposal as a result of this conversation. We're simply required to have a discussion. And so this is the required discussion. So
I recall
discuss.
this from last year.
Yes, we will probably have to do this every year for the foreseeable future. There's a fairly substantial list of cities in Oregon that meet the definition of rent burdened community. And so they're all kind of doing these kinds of meetings. It wouldn't surprise me if Minville is on that list. I don't know if you've looked into that in the past, but it's certainly quite a few cities around that meet that definition. So it's something that we're all kind of struggling with. There's, of course, the housing shortage on the West Coast that we're all kind of dealing with. So. Yeah.
All right. Well, there's a lot of contributing factors, and you know, I recall this from last year when we discussed a little bit more thoroughly. The smaller cities like ours are particularly difficult for folks that choose or need to rent their residences. It's tough having spent a good portion of my adult life as a renter before I bought my home. It's tough, and it doesn't matter. It can affect folks at any income level. If it's not there, regardless of whether or not you can afford it or whether you qualify or have good credit or bad credit, it's tough to find rental residential in smaller cities. So it's a need that the city's really not in a position to directly or aggressively fix the problem. It's just something we need to be aware of. And as we make decisions for future developments, apartment complexes, townhomes, things like that would be rental properties, we can recall this discussion that we're having tonight when we weigh our decisions on those types of proposals. So
the one thing I think we need to think about, and I know that we have to proceed to change our tax structure because of the business taxes lost and etc. That one of the barriers to purchasing a home versus renting is the tax code and the tax level in a community. One of the things that brings people to this community is the lower tax base compared to Salem. And as we move forward and have to increase taxes to stay afloat, we want to think about what that does to the cost of purchasing a home and what that does to keep people in rental housing. Is there a policy we need to change within our structure, within our planning commission structure, to encourage more rental housing if we are going to have to increase taxes? So it's something that we can be thoughtful about as we move forward and actually find a way to make rental housing supply better, which in this case, it may not change how quickly the price goes up, but it certainly may slow it down. So it's something we have to be thoughtful about as we go forward.
Thank you. Any more discussion? Sort of a mandatory meeting, but I think it's important to at least have it. So again, I'll remember to bring this up the next time we have an apartment development complex proposed, and I think that happened in the last year. So where we reminded ourselves that we're a rent burden community, so we need to take that into consideration when we consider all the factors of high density residential housing.
And I know that there are at least a few apartment complexes that are in the pipeline and in the foreseeable future. We've not received applications yet for anything. But we've had quite a few different pre-applications in the last 2 years for apartments. And I have it on good authority that at least one of those is going to be coming to us in the immediate future, that some funding has come through for that project to move forward. So we'll hopefully be seeing at least one application in the near future. But also the way site design review works, if they're able to show that they're meeting all the approval criteria outright, not requesting any variances, a lot of those can be then approved administratively with a public comment period. So not necessarily everything out there is going to come to the planning commission. It's really when they're looking at exceptions or variances to the standards that those sorts of things come to planning commission, which right there is one way to try and make housing more affordable, right? Because you're streamlining the approvals process, right? Making it more clear and objective. So it's easier to get to positive decisions on those sorts of things. So
Well, make a mental note, if a rent-based high-density project is proposed and it's not right permitted use and wouldn't necessarily come to us for a decision, let us know that we're addressing when the city of Dallas is addressing this rent burden issue. I think it's great that we're required to have this discussion once a year because it puts it to the forefront of our minds and makes us have the discussion. But we need to be reminded when we're addressing it. So if you would report back to us when, if and when these applications come through, to let us know that we're working on it.
certainly, yes. And the one that I'm thinking of specifically is I think a big enough deal and quite prominently located that it will generate some discussion when that application moves forward. It will certainly be, you'll certainly see it as it goes in. But there's also been other, pre-application conferences elsewhere in the city. So hopefully there's some movement in the near future on some of the other ones as well. And certainly, we could talk about like regulatory barriers that make, housing more affordable, how much of that is, or how much more expensive, how much of that is under our control versus, state building code, international fire codes. That's a, whole puzzle in and of itself.
Federal funding or any other kind of state funding that they tend to drive the bus, as it were, for that.
Yes, and
for
so
that requirement.
And so especially if you're doing regulated affordable housing, there's all kinds of grant requirements to meet in order to be eligible for grants. If you're private sector, a lot of the lending institutions, they have kind of a standard checklist that they go down as they're permitting or lending for multifamily projects. And so if you're not meeting the checkbox because this is Oregon and not Florida, and their criteria are made for Florida, but we're not them, so it's not appropriate here. Well, so too bad, you're out of luck. So there's
like low income housing tax credits is national and it's applied to every state regardless.
So it's sometimes hard to make the round peg fit the square hole, as it were. So
well, there might be some ways that we could maybe encourage it, or at least change the code so it's helping them with the cost in any way we can. There's certainly a lot of it that's driven at another level.
Exactly. Well, and certainly there are additional things that we could do to make things more flexible here. Things like reduced parking requirements, are certainly something that's within our control if we feel we can justify that, politically. There's a number of proposals that we've had for apartments here in the downtown, or in our commercial areas. The limitation on those is you usually have to have a ground floor commercial component with residential up above, which is problematic if you're using grant funding or affordable housing tax credits, because there's legislation regarding prevailing wage laws when you're working with commercial projects. So if your project has commercial on the ground floor, the entire building is then subject to that. And so that can add millions to the cost because you've increased the cost of the entire building, not just the commercial component. So relaxing the commercial requirements in our commercial zones could be another way to address that. Of course, then you have the challenge of we have a shortage of commercial zones, so we want more
Exactly.
housing in them. How do you balance those competing needs? That's something that Portland struggled with for a while. They allowed apartments in the commercial zones in outer East Portland, and they ended up with a whole lot of housing and not very much commercial. And so having that balance is a challenge when the individual uses are market
Not to
driven.
mention
So
they had 0 parking requirements, so everybody had to park on the street, and now there was a pushback for that
Mhm.
and a lawsuit.
Sure. But it also makes housing more affordable, right? If you don't
It-
have to
it
provide
does.
parking.
It totally does.
Parking spaces, especially structured parking, can be exceptionally expensive. And so to the extent that you can not have parking and instead have people bicycle or take public transit or, walk to their employment in downtown Dallas, that's a substantial savings, both in the construction of the housing, but then also in the daily living of the people who occupy that housing. So
I think it's safe to say that there are multiple barriers to addressing the rent burden status that we live under for another year, but I think it's a good discussion. Is there anybody else that would like to add anything to the discussion? Staff in the back, anybody? We're rent burdened, we know this. Okay, thank you very much. Good discussion. Agenda item number.
Next.
Next, 7. I've got 2 agendas. One had the red and burden community discussion, one did not. So end of the year commissioner comments. I don't have any except to say that we've had a good year. I think we made some good decisions here. We've had some good discussions. I think that we have stayed true to our task here on the planning commission. I hope that I've realized your expectations for me my first year as being president, and they had me sign the paperwork to stay on the planning commission for next year as well. So happy new year, happy holidays. Does any other commissioners have any comments for our last meeting in 2023?
I don't know if I'm gonna be here next year or
Okay.
not. I don't know. I have not a clue. I think my term expires this month. And I don't know what's gonna happen next, but somehow, someday, some way, I really would like to have 20 minutes somehow with this group to share background experience that I have of planning done a different way.
Right.
Doesn't mean it's appropriate here. And I understand all the law. I've been around long enough to have an appreciation for all that. But just, I think it would be refreshing for us to hear a different view. And I don't know, we'll see what happens in the new year, but if I'm back in the new year, I really would like to have that discussion if we can do it.
Chase, has Mr. Schulte been invited to continue his service on the planning commission if his term is up? And I don't know whose term is where. I didn't know mine was up until they told me.
I'm not sure that decision's been made at city council yet, so that's what we're waiting for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we hope to have you back. And like I said, if you're not, get in touch with staff or get in touch with me. We'll have you come in and we'll have a discussion.
Even if it's totally informal, not.
Sure.
Just a chat.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about it. Okay, I'd like to talk about it. Any other commissioners have any end of the year comments for us?
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Okay, any staff comments?
So I know that you've asked for periodic updates on some of the things that you've discussed previously. So the development code updates that you discussed a while ago on a couple of different occasions and then have gone to the city council. Those will be going for final deliberations in January. City council held a series of workshops regarding discussing some of those proposals. It sounds like some of them probably won't be moving forward for further adoption at this time, that there'll be subsequent follow-on process for some of the more controversial items that will dig, I think, a little deeper into some of the potential options and potentially impacts of any changes. So
Anything that comes back to us in that regard?
quite possibly. It's hard to predict at this point exactly what form that might take, but I think having the planning commission weigh in again with some additional analysis would certainly be a potential benefit to the process overall. So,
Okay.
but yeah.
What were those parts that wouldn't be? What were the controversial ones that wouldn't be?
Well, bicycle parking turned
I
out to be
wondered about
really
that.
controversial.
Driveways.
Driveways turned out to be really controversial. The sidewalks being offset versus curb tight
Yeah.
seemed somewhat controversial. There were some other changes that were discussed amongst the other proposals. So there's a few that'll see some tweaks as they go to the final
So tweaks or
deliberations.
complete removal, and we'll address those so the other pieces can move forward, and that will just be readdressed at some later date, or that's all still moving.
Right. So at this point, the majority of it is moving forward, except for the ones that they're going to have a follow-on process later. Part of it's this kind of, let's get the parts of it that we can all agree to sort of done and out the door, and then deal with some of this other stuff at a later date. So yeah. Once we have the actual final adopted, I'll be able to give you some greater detail as to what was approved and what wasn't. But that's for the city council to decide in January. So
I think I speak for the entire planning commission when I say that we have no objection to anything being referred back to us for further discussion. I want to communicate that through staff to council that we're not here to just to pass the buck on to them. If they want to bump anything back down to us, we're happy to take that on.
Tackle it again.
staff are appreciative of your willingness to give these things consideration, and I'll pass that sentiment on to the council through the appropriate means. Which means telling my boss, and that boss telling his boss, and his boss telling his boss, and so on and so forth.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody. And so I think that concludes everything that we have for this evening. So with no further ado, I think that we will adjourn this evening's meeting at 8:09 p.m. Thank you very much.
Christmas.